do, I want to bring him up to the stage. He's actually going to read an excerpt from his book that we're going to talk a lot about today. John Wannamaker. Please put your hands together.
Well, thank you, TheReuPLIve. I want to just touch on something really briefly as we get into what we're going to do here. The title of the book is called The Voice from Inside. It talks about failure bringing new knowledge. And whenever you fail, you learn something. It's not a failure where you just collapse and you no longer get up, but you learn something. And this is something I learned in federal prison. We'll get into that in a little while. But the title of this is called We Eat It. As the prison population rises and the number of people with federal convictions increase, Americans are realizing prison is not what they imagine. All prisons don't have weightlifting opportunities, 3 nutritious meals, or rapes every day. Television has given its viewers false expectations for prisons, yet Americans don't check to see how prisoners are punished behind the walls of facilities. Why? As the New Leaf Alliance Foundation spreads throughout the prison systems, you would be surprised at some of the reports received regarding conditions and treatment of prisoners. One condition of surprise I would try to describe in brief here is the food. My report stems from my experience of working in the Bureau of Prisons Food Service Department at various prisons. FCI Memphis from 2006 through 2008, FCI Texarkana from 2008 to 2010, FCI Fort Dix from 2010 to 2011, and MDC Brooklyn from 2011 until 2012 when this was written. I stayed in prison until 2014, but this was written long before I was released. My apologies to the food service administrators who take offense to what I say here. This is not a report of what I've seen all of you do, but it is a report on what the rest of you do. Some of the food service administrators I've had the pleasure of working for value their jobs and they value fellow humans, even if the fellow humans are prisoners. This reminds me of a very special slogan that said, "A fat jail is a happy jail." Anyway, would you shop for, buy, take home, cook, and eat a box of frozen food without English words on it? What if the box was obviously frostbitten, frozen, and marked with Russian writing? We eat it. At many of the prisons where I've worked in the food service department, it is amazing the size of the food. Okay, let me try to explain. I'm not writing about portion sizes, but the actual size of the chicken leg quarters. Have a male bodybuilder do a bicep pose, cut off his wrist, and remove his arm from his shoulder. That is the size of one leg quarter we receive. It must be at least the size and thickness of a whole chicken or maybe a dinosaur leg, and yes, we eat it. A few years ago, I went into a freezer to get a box of corn dogs for a lunch meal. I grabbed one of the 30-plus boxes stacked in a freezer and returned to the cooking area. When the box was open, it was a box of powder and popsicle sticks. It resembled what I imagined to be human ashes in an urn. We didn't eat this box, but all the corn dogs we ate came from the same stack and we ate them. Speaking of boxes, have you ever purchased a box of any food item with a bright neon sticker that reads microbiological hold? We eat it. Chocolate and vanilla pudding that expired 3 years ago. Guess what? We eat it. Food labeled not for human consumption, international use only. What does that say about me and how my human nature is viewed? I don't know, but we eat it. By now, I hope this gives you a glimpse of why prison isn't as easy as believed by some. Food is a basic commodity, and if you think it, we probably eat it. Roadkill, roaches, mice, and all. Lastly, try defrosting raw food, cooking it, cooling it, refrigerate it, package it, transport it, unpack it, cook it again, and then serve it, and we eat it. Yep, we eat it. Even Floyd Money Mayweather says the food and the water are detrimental to his body and recently requested home detention for that fact. He's not seen anything until he buys a packaged item from the commissary and finds a freeze-dried cockroach in it. Unfortunately, some of us eat that too. That's it. I didn't mean to leave a spirit of heaviness. But it's my way. This book is my way of producing some transparency to tear down the prison walls. Because if we knew what happened inside the prison, we wouldn't sit by and let it happen.
Put our hands together. What is missing right here? So we got John Wannamaker here today, y'all. Y'all just heard an excerpt from his book. So I'm pretty sure y'all curious about this story because I'm looking at this young man, and it just goes to show that we all have a story. We all have a testimony. We all have something that we've gone through. And I'm gonna let you start. Just let me know, how do we get to this situation with you having this type of experience?
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me. Really, I'm honored just to be here to tell this story. I'm from Brooklyn, New York, and in my lifetime, I've always been a good student. I've been a person who reads a lot, I write a lot. I used to have a scholarship in college. I used to have a scholarship to go to college in art. I used to draw. I used to just look at something and I could draw it. And we moved from Brooklyn, New York to Columbia, South Carolina, my senior year, Christmas Day. And I lost the scholarship because I was no longer a resident of the state. So I decided I was gonna go in the Marine Corps. And so I'm a former United States Marine. I get out of the Marine Corps. And in the military, they found out, they said, hey, you have a computer in your room. Why do you have a computer in your room? I said, because I work on computers. I'm good with computers. And they said, okay, and they changed my job. I was a jet engine mechanic, and they put me in S1. So with them moving my job, I had a lot more time just to be in the unit. And when I got out of the military, I decided I don't want to work on jets. I want to do something on computers, maybe. And I went to the local airport and decided, I said, hey, here's my training file. I want to work on jets. And they said, you can't work on jets. Why not? They said, because you need to have 8 years in the military in order to work on a civilian plane, so therefore you can't do it. So I realized that all of the time I had spent in the military wasn't really something that I was going to use when I got out. But God prepares you by putting you through something because you're going to use it later on at some point. And so fast forward, I became a computer programmer. And my first computer programming job, my best friend came to me. I was working as a telephone salesperson for Olin Mills. You want to get an 8 by 10 picture? My team would call you on the phone. Hey, how you doing? And you get a free 8 by 10. And my friend came by one day, my job, I was making $250 a week. And anybody knows that's not a whole lot of money. And he gave me a book. He said, listen, I just got a job making $35,000 a year. You might want to apply. I said, what's it doing? He says, working on computers. I said, really? He gave me a book. It was called the Visual Basic Bible. Now, it's not the first Bible I ever had, but it was a Visual Basic Bible on how do you program. And I stayed up all night going through the computer and going through all the examples, and I finished the book. I get into bed at 7 o'clock in the morning. At 8 o'clock, my phone rings. And it was the job calling me. Now, I only stayed up all night reading this book and going through the examples. And to fast forward a little bit, I get the job, and $30,000 a year. And then they laid everybody off. My next job was $42,000 a year, then $60,000 a year, then $72,000 a year, then $94,000 a year. And then I went to college. I was in the military and got out, and that's where I guess my gifting came in, because I'm a logical person. You know, I'm the guy who can write down the directions on how to tie a shoe. How do you do that? And so I moved to Dallas, and when I moved to Dallas, my next job was making $104,000 a year. And I joined a private investment club and ended up controlling over $20 million. And I started trying to help other people. We're never taught financial intelligence in school. So because we're not taught financial intelligence in school, we don't know how to really control money, how to raise money, how to do anything with money. So in my particular situation, I'm logical. It made sense to me, and I started helping other people. And I learned something, I tell this in all of my speeches, but you will always trust somebody who will trust somebody that you should never trust. So I'll say it again for anybody who didn't get it. You will always trust someone who will trust someone that you should never trust. See, the thing is that we make these friends, and then the friends, you bring your friend around somebody else, and that other person automatically trusts your friend because they trust you. And that was my situation. I was running an investment company that I developed, that was my company, and my best friend says, hey, listen, I have $10 million with this guy. I needed somewhere to put $2.5 million, and I fly out to Vegas, and it's a long story, but you know, he was a person who was of high authority in the church. I trust him with $2.5 million, not doing any research with him, but because I met him through my friend. And 6 months later, the FBI came to my house, and it came to my nice house, my nice big house. And you know, in the situation, they froze everything and took all they can. Then 5 years later, they decided that they were going to indict me, and I ended up getting sentenced to 110 months in federal prison. And 110 months, for those of you who aren't good at math like I am, is 12, 24, 36, 48, 60, 72, 84, 96, 108. That's 9 years and 2 months. I ended up doing 7 years and 7 months with good time. And anybody who knows anything about God, you know that that number means something.
So now, the experience that you had, the voice from inside, is this book tailored around that particular experience?
It is. Basically what the book was, it was my way of dealing with the environment. A lot of people play cards, a lot of people watch BET, a lot of people work out. It just so happened I worked out, I couldn't draw anymore. I stopped drawing when I was 17. So I needed a way to get rid of the creative energy. So as I wrote in that particular article, it was called We Eat It. My job was in the Food Service Administration office. So I was in charge of making sure the inventory stayed correct. You can't choose where you get the food from, but you can make sure that the inventory stays correct. You can make sure the correct invoices go out and such. So I would sit in the kitchen, and I had this thing where I told people, if you just bring kids into the lunchroom and let them see all the people that are sitting in the lunchroom, they'll never commit a crime. Because the look people have can deter a kid. My daughter always says stranger danger. But imagine if you took a troubled youth, a 10, 12, 14-year-old into the federal prison system and let them see 800 men on this side sitting down eating, no one talking, everyone being silent, 800 guys on this side. I used to just sit there and watch these guys. Everybody knew me. They called me the senator of the prison because I knew everyone. I'd be there for breakfast, and this book was the result of that. Most people write a book about prison once they get out and they try to remember what happened in prison. This isn't written like that. This was written, you get on my nerves today, tonight I'm writing, and 10 years from now it's going to be a good book.
I like the way you think.
Yeah, so that's how the book came about. It's a collection of everything, every part of transparency, what I can bring. Most people want to help prisoners, but they've never been there, so they don't know.
I want to know, man, because this is you don't really know how near and dear this is to me, but I want you to talk a little bit, because before you went into prison, you actually had your faith in Christ. Am I right?
Absolutely. I grew up with my grandmother. Hi, Grandma. With my grandmother and my mom and dad. My mom and dad were around, but I grew up with my grandmother. She was a pastor at a church in New York. And we went to church 6.5 days a week. So, you know, she's at church early in the morning at 4:30 making breakfast for the people who are coming to church. So who makes breakfast for the volunteers who have to be there at 6 o'clock? That's my grandmother.
Right.
And so I'm there, and I used to draw, so I make these calligraphy posters of Proverbs, and we put them up on the wall. She was the co-pastor. She wasn't the head pastor, but she was a big part of my life. I wake up in the middle of the night, she's putting oil on my forehead, and she's praying for me.
Come on.
My first scripture I ever learned, I said, Grandma, you always quote me scriptures. Can you teach me one? She was surprised. You know, you have this little kid that want to learn the scripture. And so she told me, she said, you remember St. John 1 and 2? Let not your heart be troubled, for if you believe in God, you believe also in me. In my Father's house are many mansions. If it were not so, I would have told you. And now that I think about it, it just hit me that that scripture was for where I was. That scripture was for what God was preparing me for. And because I kept my faith throughout everything. In the military, I didn't know how to swim. I'm from Brooklyn. People throw bottles in the pool, and you don't go swimming in the pool. And so in the military, you have to stand on this 16-foot diving board, and you step off with all this gear on, and a rifle, and a helmet, and everything. And I stepped off, and I told the guy, I said, I can't swim. He said, show me. What do you mean, show you?
Show you
So
you can.
I jump off the diving board and sink to the bottom. He grabs me by the back of my coat and drags me off to the side and says, you can't swim. I said, I told you I couldn't swim. He said, go down there and learn. Well, I ended up getting dropped from my platoon because I caught double lung pneumonia. So they told me, they said, you have 1 week in order to get back to your platoon. So all night I'd sit in my bed and read my Bible. And so after 3 days, I decided I can do it. You know, I only have 2 days left after this. I decided I could do it, and I jumped in the pool. He pulled me to the back and said, you can't swim. Go down there. So next day, I get up and I say, you know what, God, if you don't do this, it's not for me to do. So I took the little Bible and I put it in my cargo pocket, which is the pocket on your hip. And I went up to the top of the diving board, and he said, it's been in ship position. And I went and stood in the position. And he said, okay, ready to step? I looked at him and I looked down at the water and I stepped off the diving board. And I don't remember what happened next, except the drill instructor said, reach back and grab the buoy line. I had swam 25 yards and I don't know how I did. Today, I'm a grown-up. I've been out of the military for almost 20 years. I still can't swim.
So I guess you're not going to cover the part of your life where, you know, you played in the NFL and was married to Evelyn Lozano, was that in there?
Evelyn Lozano?
Yeah. Why did you change your name also to Wannamaker? I mean, I thought Chad Johnson was a good
Johnson.
What? Oh, y'all didn't know this was Chad Johnson? Chad Johnson in the house, ladies and gentlemen. Chad Johnson. Right here, live and direct. We got Chad Johnson in the building. Ocho Cinco.
Yeah, you know.
Have you heard that before?
No, I haven't.
I mean, yeah.
I mean, this dynamite guy is dynamite.
Yes.
You know, I had the opportunity to meet him, and you know, he told me to get up here and say something about Rex, do a eulogy about Rex.
Rex?
Rex.
My dog Rex?
Yeah.
No, not your dog, Rex. Just our friend Rex that passed on.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so he's an awesome guy. I told him I met Rex briefly with my 10-speed. I'm the reason why Rex was dead, but he didn't take that too well.
What? I mean, and he wanted you to tell me.
No, just tell the audience.
Now I gotta go home and check on my dog.
No, your dog is good. This is our friend Rex. Not your dog Rex, our friend Rex.
Our friend Rex.
Yeah, he went on to glory.
Now, John, let me ask you, the voice from inside the book, if you had to give us a brief synopsis, what do you want us to take, or what's the big takeaway from the book? What do you want your readers to gain from the book, from the voice from inside?
What I would tell you, I want you to get from it is, I'm a motivational speaker. I go around and I speak at schools, I speak at businesses, I speak at associations. The book is basically my license to say I know what I'm talking about. I have a tattoo on my arm that says failure is not an option, but there's a logo in the book that says failure isn't final. And the book is about the story of how do you find yourself in the midst of darkness, in the midst of heartache, in the midst of hurt. How do you find yourself in there, and what do you do to get back up and get back in line? It's a fascinating book because it describes a microcosm of society. It tells you stuff about the prison system that you would never know unless you were there. And I was telling Sheldon this earlier. I said, we have countries that have fallen because people have cellular phones with cameras on them, and you can show people what's happening. The country falls. They take the person out of power, the country falls. Well, this book is like having a video camera in the prison system. You know, we have so many hurting families. We have people that aren't being given the tools of reentry to get back into society correctly. We have children who are suffering with the loss of a mom and loss of a dad to the prison system. It's a struggling situation that even our politicians today don't have answers because they don't know what happens inside the system. President Obama went to the prison system and he talked with 5 people. Unfortunately, these 5 people were washed and cleaned and scanned and everything before he even arrived. So they were told, don't say this, don't say this, don't say this, don't say this. This book is what they told you not to talk about.
And let me ask you, after coming out of federal with that background, how easy was it for you to get back into society? How, to get back to a job, to get back, to find your place? Now you're in there for 9 years, am I correct?
7 years, 7 months.
7 years, 7 months, and now you're back, now you're released. So what do you do now?
This is what I tell everybody. For me, I'm the author of this book. This book came out after a year after I was released from prison. And I travel just to do speaking engagements now to try and get the word out about what's happening there, but not just there, what's happening in your own life that you can overcome. With this particular situation, for me personally, it wasn't extremely difficult to get back into society, mainly because I read a lot. I read The Economist, I read Time Magazine, I read the USA Today every day, I read the New York Times every day. I read a lot. I wanted to know what was going on in society. What was I being released back to? And unfortunately, I didn't have a very big support group when I was released. I was released to a halfway house. They gave me 6 months in a halfway house. And 6 months in a halfway house, I still worked out, and I wasn't able to get a job at first. People would see my resume and they would say, oh no, you're not gonna stay here. So they wouldn't hire me. Although for 7 years, I haven't had a real job. I was a laborer in a prison. I worked as a laborer, food service administration clerk, and something that's in the book, I worked as a suicide companion. A suicide companion is if you wanted to commit suicide, you had to talk to me. If psychology put you on suicide watch, I'm the person they would send there. And I'm happy to say no one ever committed suicide while I was there. So being reentered back into society was difficult because they didn't think I would stay. And so I ended up getting a telemarketing job, back to telephone sales again. And from there, from there, I did an interview on an online radio station, and the Bureau of Prisons heard it, and they violated me 11 days before I was to be released back in society. They put me back in prison. So my last 11 days in the halfway house, I spent it in Mansfield jail. And they released me from jail with a $22 check and no ride back to the city. So I walked on the highway with church shoes on and dress clothes from Mansfield to Arlington, where I could use a telephone.
Man, and all of that is in this book?
Yes, it is.
That story is in this book?
It is.
Because, and I already got the wrap-up song like 5 minutes ago from my wife back there. I said I was gonna point her out, and even in the end, I was gonna do it. Yeah, I was gonna do it. But I got one question that's burning in my heart, and then we're gonna talk about how people can get this book, how people can book you for speaking engagements, because I hope that they've heard just from this small conversation how much you have inside you to talk about and to share definitely about overcoming. But I can relate to you in so many ways, and I'm going to talk about this in some future episodes of TheReuPLIve, so y'all stay tuned for that. But when you were in jail and you were in this season of your life, talk to me. I mean, you kind of touched on it by saying that you were the person that people had to talk to for suicide. I think of the story of Joseph, how Joseph was in this prison and people were coming to him. They were relying on him so much, and then when they got out so much, they realized, hey, we met somebody in there. Can you? It sounds like you had that type of experience.
I did. I did suicide watch for 7 years. I did it from the highest of security levels all the way down to minimum security. And I met terrorists. I met people who had one hand and one leg from blowing themselves up with bombs. I met people who wanted to commit suicide because they managed to get a hold of some type of drug in the prison, and they woke up and they were on suicide watch because they were told they were banging their head against the wall. I've watched almost everyone possible, and I even have letters from psychology saying, please give John a job in suicide watch because he's that type of person. What I would do is, in my life, I witnessed someone try to commit suicide close to me 4 times. And whenever you witness someone try to commit suicide, you either gravitate towards it or you repel yourself against it. For me, I don't like suicide. I think it's you giving up on any hope of the future being better, because we don't know what's going to happen 5 minutes from now. So why would we give up on ourselves now? So in the prison system,
I would walk over to a door, and the person be in there, and they'd be in there in their little suicide watch, get up, and I knock on it. Before I go to suicide watch, I'm praying. While I'm there, I have my music on, and I'm listening to gospel music, and I ask them, excuse me, would you like to listen to this? And sometimes they'd listen to it, sometimes they wouldn't. But I would befriend them the minute I get there. The minute I get there, I knock on the door, and they have their name tag on the outside of the wall and tells us where they're from based on their inmate number. And I say, excuse me, sir, don't I know you from somewhere? He said, no. I said, yes, I do. You from Chicago? He'd be like, yeah? Where are you from? I said, wait a minute, your name's Robert, isn't it? He'd be like, yeah, man, where you know me from? Don't worry about it, sit back down. And he'd stay up at the door. He'd want to talk then. So I tell him, I say, hey, listen, the Knicks are playing the Mavericks tonight. Who you want to win? He said, man, I want the Mavericks to win. Well, being a suicide companion, you have to write down everything that person says and everything they do. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to get him to be forward thinking, because a person who wants to commit suicide don't care who wins the game tonight.
Right. That's
So
good.
what I did is I tried my best to help everyone. And some people needed medication, because some people just couldn't be helped regardless of how much you talk to them. But being on suicide watch, it was something that I think God said, I'm going to put you here, and I'm going to give you increase. And I've received so much increase by being there. So many people would come on suicide watch, and then I'd see them on the compound, and they'd come up to me and hug me. Hey, man, thank you. And then my friends would be like, where you know him from? And I can't tell them I know him from suicide watch. But I tell them, oh, man, I met him the other day. I said, man, he really like you. I said, no, he don't like me like that. It's all right.
And the reason why I wanted you to share that, John, is I feel that sometimes when things like this happen in our life, I mean, human nature is for us to think, oh, this is bad, this is, God, why would you allow this to happen? But in everything, especially when you're a child of God, even if you're in prison, or even if you're in a situation in any situation like this that's uncomfortable, God still gives you a platform to reach people and to touch people and to minister to people. And sometimes I believe that He may even set you up for that. One, so you can have that experience and have that experience in life, that
Right.
testimony to share with all these people. And then also so that you can save some lives, some people that may have, killed themselves in prison, that we're going to come out and do some great things, and God set that up for that time and that place for you to be there. And so I know that it was uncomfortable. I know it didn't seem, it's that kind of that fine line between uncomfortability but understanding that I still have a mission, and I'm still a child of God, and I'm still who God made me to be, even in this place. So man, I love you, man, and we're gonna continue to talk more about this in the future. But I want you to tell our fans, the voice from the inside. How can they get a copy of this book? How can they get in contact with you, book you, follow you? Give us all that information, please, sir.
No problem. I have a website, and all of my social media connections are on my website, including you can join my email list to find out where I'm going to be, what I'm going to be doing. And you can also get some motivational tidbits from me. Les Brown, one of my favorite speakers, he tells people you got to be hungry. You got to be hungry in life. Well, after going through this situation, and this is harder than what most people go through, I think you got to be thirsty. Because if you're hungry and you don't eat for 7 days, you lose weight. But if you're thirsty and you don't drink for 7 days, you die. So I think people need to get this book, and you need to get me, because there's so much more that I can tell you if I'm prodded correctly. So you can get to my website, johnamaker.com, JohnAmaker.com. And my Twitter is John K. Wann, JohnKWANN. And I'm on Facebook as well. I do have a public figure Facebook page as well as a personal Facebook page. So johnamaker.com is my website. Telephone number for anyone who wants to book me is 817-935-8920. So I'm accustomed to leaving voicemail messages, so it's 817-935-8920.
I had a final thought for him. Most of the prisons that we face are not physical bars, but most of us have our own personal prison.
That's right.
And if he can give us strength to be behind a physical prison, which is just as powerful as one that's in your head.
Mhm.
It's like if he can make it there, you can make it in your life. We all have some deficiency or something that makes us feel trapped or
Yes.
stuck in some particular place or area. So I think this book has got such wisdom on a physical prison. You can translate that into mental and freedom prisons that we have from the inside. So I just appreciate your wisdom. I appreciate you for standing steadfast, because if we had more time, I would be talking to you
Yes.
7 years. I mean, how in the world would you think when they give you 10 years, you're in court, did you sweat? You be like, what am I
Right.
gonna do for 10 years? I didn't sign up for 10 years, you know?
That's right.
So-
That's true. I like what you just said, just to finish this out. It's called The Voice from Inside, but it's not just the voice from inside prison. It's the voice from within me. It's what did I think? What did I feel? What was I told? What happened when I was divorced in prison? What happened when they had a black president they were about to vote in to office? What happened throughout all of that? What happened when large evangelical people died and I was in prison? And then, you know, it's a lot more in the book than just a little bit. And you can't read it sitting down all at once.
It's like Prego, y'all. It's in here. I know y'all interested. The Voice from Inside, John Wannamaker. Put your hands together for this man.